Obviously, the president has also always been interested in low gasoline prices, but it's become clear now that where we are with prices now, we're going to see a major decline in U.S. production. And so it has gone from being an economic issue to also being a national security and an energy security issue.
Yo, welcome back. We are now all the way on episode number 4 of That's What the F Happens. I'm Ali down here in South Florida, and my co-host is Clay up there in the Metro New York area, also known as North Jersey. What's up, Clay?
New Jerusalem. Never thought I'd be repping New Jersey, but that's where I am. How you doing today? How we doing out there?
So basically, what we wanted to talk, or what I wanted to go over today, was what's been happening with the oil price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. So just to give a little bit of background.
How much is demand down right now? How bad could it get?
Alex, hi. Thanks for having me today. It's bad.
Information on it. The Saudis are part of the cartel that's known as OPEC. And Russia is not part of OPEC, but Russia had like a loose agreement with them. And due to the coronavirus, it was agreed, or it was thought to be agreed, that both OPEC and this group called OPEC Plus would reduce the production of oil because the demand had gone down and they want to keep the price up. So they were going to reduce the production. And the day after, they had a conference in Vienna. And the day after the conference, Russia said, you know what? I'm not going to reduce my production of oil, or we're not going to reduce our production of oil for various reasons. And ever since then, they've been kind of in a oil price war, wherein which the price of oil keeps getting driven down because the Russians refuse to reduce their output. And then the Saudis then, I guess, in retaliation somehow increase their output to try to drive down the price. But some background on it is that the Russians can produce oil, or can sustain producing oil at a price that's close to half of what the Saudis need to produce the oil at. So as the Saudis keep driving the price down, they're actually driving themselves closer and closer to bankruptcy. So why this matters to people all the way over here in America is because the United States is a pretty big oil producer ourselves, but we do it through shale. I know y'all probably heard of fracking.
I can often hold a standard kitchen match to my water, and like I said, it is unpredictable, but the methane randomly travels with the water, and sometimes it will light quite spectacularly. Just like that.
And things like that. But there's a whole bunch of jobs that are related to the oil industry over here in America. But when you frack, the cost of a barrel to break even is pretty high, somewhere between $50 and $55 a barrel. So the fracking industry, or the shale industry, natural gas, whatever you want to call it, has been suffering. A Colorado-based shale oil company filed for bankruptcy last week.
A Denver-based petroleum company is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Whiting Petroleum says it's been hit hard by the Saudi Arabia-Russia price war and lower demand for gas due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The company's stock plunged in 91% in the past 3 months.
And all indications show that plenty of workers are being let go, they're being furloughed, and it looks like a lot of other shale companies are gonna be facing hard times as a result of this price war. Now, recently, Donald Trump said that he believed that they were gonna reach a deal, they meaning the Russians and the Saudis, and then oil price went back up based on that. But to this moment, we don't really have a deal where they're going to reduce the output of oil to raise the price back out. Now, what does that mean for you as a consumer? Well, your gas should be getting cheaper. But there's this whole other part about how the dollar, the sometimes called the petrodollar, is tied to the price of oil.
It's an issue. I think the big takeaway from everything I've been reading and observing about discussions around oil, it's difficult to wrap your head around. There are a lot of players. It's essentially oil is the stuff of king making. So you can tell that so much influence in the world is derived from control of the oil fields, of the oil resources. And so it's like a game of risk in a way. And you get all this brinksmanship going on between Russia, Saudi Arabia. Iran is in the mix. That's another important element. And as far as I understand, Iran and Saudi Arabia are pretty bitter enemies almost perpetually. So that adds a twist to it. And I think even before the so-called price war with Russia, the initial shots fired were between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And of course, the United States gets involved by sanctioning Iran. And that's been ongoing. They've been sanctioning them forever, purportedly because of the development, I think, of plutonium, because of the fear of nuclear Iran. So to a certain extent, you start seeing that as much as this is about oil and the price of oil and price wars and this and that, there are proxy wars going on that it definitely relates to oil, but it's that geopolitics and new world order type stuff. Control who's going to control the world and how, and it is pretty. I wouldn't say it's humorous, but I just kind of have to chuckle at the fact that we continue to pinpoint countries as being problematic in terms of being terrorist affiliated or threats to peace and safety. They're always oil producing nations. Right now one of the nations we could talk about is Venezuela. And that's something we had already discussed earlier that we
I mean, that's a great point. Venezuela is also part of OPEC. And why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about what's been going on with Venezuela, with the United States government deploying troops down there, labeling Maduro as a narco-terrorist.
The Department of Justice is announcing the unsealing of a superseding indictment filed in the Southern District of New York against 4 defendants, including Nicolas Maduro, as well as the current head of Venezuela's Constituent Assembly, the former director of military intelligence, and a former high-ranking general for their involvement in narco-terrorism. The indictment of Nicolas Maduro and his co-defendants alleges a conspiracy involving an extremely violent terrorist organization known as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the FARC.
But also, we know from history, resources make the difference.
Absolutely. I mean, they drive a nation, and so you can power a country, the military, the business world. So many things are driven by that whatever your energy source is. But as far as Venezuela, the antagonism between the United States and Venezuela has existed for 20 some years now. I feel like ever since Hugo Chavez he came to power on a socialist agenda. And of course, a socialist agenda, if you look at how you very quickly get on the wrong side of the United States and other superpowers. The first thing you do is you nationalize certain things, oil fields being one of them, and that pisses off the capitalists. Um, I I think it's more.
The United Corporation of America.
Yep, absolutely, and I think a big problem is that obviously there is a perception in these countries that the United States, through their investments and through their interests in countries, they manipulate a country, and so I think that's why you often see this knee-jerk reaction to nationalize and force out uh, foreign businesses and investors and whatnot. And of course, that's happened in the past. Hugo Chavez, he was the victim of a coup that was pretty obviously U.S. backed, at least to me. And even after his passing, they've been going after his successor, Maduro, for ages now. There have been some suspected attempted coups. There was even something in the news that I had mentioned to you earlier. I believe it was a retired general was taking. He claimed to be the owner of some a cache of guns and whatnot that were making their way from Colombia into Venezuela, and there's a very powerful opposition leader in Venezuela right now. I believe he's like the Speaker of the House. I forget what his official position is, but his name's Guaido, and he's been really pushing to knock Maduro out. And the problem with these sort of political struggles in a country like Venezuela or Cuba, or any of these countries, is the opposition, they'll always play this, well, we're doing the will of the people, sort of, that's their angle, that's their argument. But it's really hard to separate the truth in terms of, is it really the will of the people, or is this a the wealthy and powerful of a country being aided by the wealthy and powerful of the United States, and portraying it as a popular uprising or struggle. So I don't know, we're getting down a bit of a rabbit hole and tangent, but I mean, again, the common thread through all this is that Venezuela is a major oil producer. They are part of OPEC, and
What I
again,
will say is, what I found to be very ironic was the fact that the Trump administration is deploying all these forces to stop narco terrorists in Mexico, because they say that these Mexican drug gangs will take advantage of the fact that people are in social distancing and the economy shut down.
right.
But then Maduro said that the United States government is trying to take advantage of the fact that the Venezuelan country is shut down for the pandemic.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's interesting where they're both saying, "Oh, you're trying to use the pandemic to bum rush us," and then we're saying, "Well, we're preemptively striking because you'll try to use the pandemic against us."
It's that classic Spider-Man meme where it's like the two
Right.
images of Spider-Man pointing at each other, right? And then it goes back to one of the oft repeated phrases we spit over here on That's What the F Happens. The never let a good crisis go to waste.
Never let a good crisis go to waste.
That applies to any smart strategist. So Venezuela presumably would use it, and Venezuela and their leaders would presumably use it to their advantage, and of course the U.S. also. Trump. The other factor is, historically you see a tendency when poll numbers are bad, when a president needs some good press, nothing like starting an aggression on a weaker country to win back the hearts of the American
To
people.
create some sense of nationalism, to stir up nationalism.
And it stirs up the nationalism. It also, if you can claim some sort of victory on that front, it's the feel-good thing. And for the United States, one of the things I've realized from various election cycles at this point is that Americans are really fixated with the idea that we have to show strength in the world, strength, and so it's like,
well, because it's the empire, so there's there's the country of the United States, but then there's also the American empire.
Yep. Well, and it's also that it's a bizarre mentality that people have, because I've heard people have this attitude that we shouldn't back down, that we have to show our strength. Yet that people have this belief on the macro level when we're talking about the U.S. on the national scene, but they're the same people that would snicker and really criticize people if it was on a personal level. If you were insulted by someone and you say, "Well, I gotta fuck this dude up because he disrespected me," they'd be the same people that'd be like, that's
Be the bigger man.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it's a little bizarre, the mentality that we have as a country. I mean, there's so many elements of, like, my father, for example, is not exactly a hawk, as they would say. He's not the, he I believe he might have even gone to jail for protesting the Vietnam War in his college days. So I mean, people's views change certainly, but I don't view him as being any sort of gung ho sort of individual. But he definitely is one of these people that I always like to challenge him on this, like, we're the greatest country in the world. And I like to say, well, oh yeah, well, tell me why we're the greatest. And what, were we really the greatest if we, like, were we the greatest when we enslaved millions and millions of people? Were we the greatest when we?
Well, I mean, probably. And that's why people want to, quote unquote, make it great again.
Well, I mean, again, my father is neither someone.
No, I'm not saying anything towards your father particularly.
No, I understand, but there is sort of a. I guess I'm making the delineation only because there are people that either would defend slavery or say, hey, it was in the past, whatever. He wouldn't even do anything of that sort, but he still has the view. It's like it's the paradox of that mentality, is that there are people that believe this to be the best country in the world, and that it's been the best country in the world for quite some time. Yet they very conveniently, it's not that they're just like that. That's okay. It's okay that we had slaves or that we stole land from natives and all the other egregious offenses that we can chalk up to the American empire. But they, it's like they don't factor it into their thinking, and I guess that's my point, is that there's certainly a level of conditioning. I mean, if you think about it, people repeat that phrase so much that it becomes second nature. This is the greatest country in the world. We can do anything. This is the greatest country in the world. We should have free healthcare. Bernie Sanders, I believe, has said that. So there are people that can toss that notion of the United States is the greatest country in the world around in such a debonair way that I'm sure there's a term from your reading about when you repeat something so much that it becomes fact. I know there's a term.
Oh, there is
but that's essentially what it is. That's what this is the greatest country in the world is. It just becomes so embedded in our brains that we repeat it without thinking.
It's like a mantra to some degree.
Yeah.
So I mean, what we know also, not to go away from that, is that within our own country, Whiting Petroleum had to go ahead and file BK and tons of jobs, shale jobs are being lost. As it turns out, Donald Trump also said that he is considering putting tariffs on crude oil that's coming into the country to try to keep the prices high.
If the oil price stays the way it is because of people that really want to see it go up. When I say we want to save a great industry, and we built a great industry in this country. If they don't get along, I would do that. Yeah, I would do tariffs, very substantial tariffs, because we're independent now. We have our own oil. And if I did the tariffs, we essentially would be saying we don't want foreign oil.
So that people don't end up losing their jobs. But the irony to me is just that we're all for capitalism, but we don't really know what capitalism is because we've never really had a free market. The market's always been regulated. It's always been taxed. It's always so we don't really know what a free market is. So at the end of the day, me as a consumer,
well,
I'm happy with cheaper gas.
Well,
but
exactly.
Apparently people out in Texas who depend on shale to make a living, they're not happy with it.
Yeah. Well,
but at the same time,
right? That's the dichotomy.
What doesn't the market determine? What happened to supply and demand? Just regular economics. We don't really have that. We don't have economics. We have intervention.
Well, and in places like West Texas, southern New Mexico, there's one of the biggest what do you call it, reserves below the ground there in that area of West Texas and southern New Mexico, southeast New Mexico. One of the dichotomies also is that there are a lot of small producers in that area. You know, ambitious people that they get startup money from, you know, bankers in New York and whatnot, and they go, you know, trying to make a dollar and a dream off of digging these wells, the hydraulic fracking and whatnot. And while at the macro level, the effort right now is to slow production, a lot of those, especially smaller fracking companies, their lifeblood is the sheer amount of production that they can do. Like, it's like pump until you run a well dry, because
the thing is, there's so much money that it costs in like exploring and trying to find oil that it says here that, you know, they've cut capital spending in trying to actually find oil by $12.6 billion, and that makes a huge difference. You know, so
I saw a figure like worldwide right now. There's $100 billion less that will be injected in the economy because of the slowdown. Because they just lay off people, they stop digging, and then there are residual effects of that also. In that, you know, what happens in a lot of these instances is they just straight up abandon wells. You know, like, these people aren't going to take the time to and manpower and money to like pay crews to deconstruct the wells and bring everything down. So like, one of the things I observed was that particularly with fracking, they have to cap these wells apparently after they stop digging there, so that it contains the release of the methane gas into the air. But when they abandon the wells, they don't even bother with that. So there's wells out there in the world that are just spewing methane into the air because they just say, fuck it, you know, too expensive. The oil market's gone to shit. You know,
according to Bloomberg, nearly 2/3 of the $100 billion in global spending cuts could come in the U.S. shale fields. And it says that for the contractors, no service business will feel that pain more than the one that blasts water, sand, and chemicals underground to release trapped hydrocarbons, also known as hydraulic fracturing. Now, I just remember back in the day, they had that movie Gasland. Did you see that?
I don't think I've seen Gasland.
So Gasland, they were fracking on people's property and contaminating their actual well water with the natural gas. So when they would turn on their sink, they could set it on fire.
Just like that.
Yeah.
It was basically completely combustible.
Well,
so there is some concerns about what fracking does to the actual environment.
Oh, well,
and then on top of it, residuals you were talking about. What about all the money that these people from the oil industry spend in their communities, where they spend on places to live, where they spend on food, they spend on trucks, they spend on whatever they spend on?
Well, there's so two things that you have brought to mind for me. First of all is another impact of fracking, and these things are all disputed. If you're in the oil industry, the oil industry says, yeah, that's bullshit. That, you know, the water wasn't set on fire, it was blah blah. You know, they always have a story on there.
Right, of course.
In the same vein, in parts of western Oklahoma, I don't know if you heard about this, but they're experiencing small magnitude earthquakes for the first time in like recorded history, and everyone's saying, why the hell is this happening? And the suspicion is that it's caused by the fracking, which what it does is it's loosening all this earth and turning it out and whatnot, and so it's essentially messing with the foundation of the earth in that area, and thus causing these earthquakes. So that's one thing. The two other things I should mention are that you know, I'm somewhat well versed with oil because of my time working in New Mexico, and I worked in a sort of a budgetary capacity. And the New Mexico state budget is hugely reliant on oil and gas to fund everything at the state level. The K through 12 and higher education system relies heavily on what they call oil and gas and gross receipts taxes. So the last I heard that they're looking at least 1.2 billion less in revenue than what was projected. New Mexico passed a budget in I believe it was sometime in mid-February or March. I forget what level of session they had this year, but that budget was supposed to increase spending in the state by like 700 million or something like that. And at that point, you know, when they passed the budget, there weren't these fears about the oil. You know, they were watching oil prices, but you know what good economists do and everything is they do these revenue projections where they anticipate drops in the price of oil and whatnot, and they account for that and still drawing up a budget. Despite all of that, they're projecting a budget hole. New Mexico has a budget right now of about $6.5–7 billion, and the last I heard, they were projecting at least 1.2 billion less in revenue than what they were projecting. So what that does for a state like New Mexico, and I'm sure Colorado, North Dakota, Alaska, I believe. I would say Texas, but Texas is a funny state. I don't know if you know this, but Texas, I think they only meet like every 2 years to draw a budget because they're so anti-government. They're like the less governing officials meet, the less shit they can fuck up. That's literally the belief in Texas.
It sounds very smart. I kind of don't disagree.
Well, I could tell you all types of stories about, you know, my experience working in the legislature, and it does make a lot of sense. But anyway, so all these states are going to have to redraw their budgets, and the crazy shit is that how do you call back all your legislators for a special session in a coronavirus outbreak in which people are supposed to social distance? This is further complicated because of the nature of, you know, think about your Senate chamber and your House chamber. These are closed quarters. They're usually indoors. Sometimes they're underground. I shouldn't say usually indoors. They're always indoors. But we always joke that, you know, the legislative chambers were a germ incubator. You know, every winter when we would meet for the legislative session, it was just counted on that people would get sick as a result of being indoors during winter, cough, sneeze, flu, all this stuff. So they can't even figure out how to hold a special session right now. And of course, you know, things are just being exacerbated by because it doesn't seem like we've seen rock bottom for oil prices. And as you mentioned, you know, Trump's over here. He wants to. Um, he's talking about different ways of bailing out the oil industry, and like any other places, it's not going to be the little small oil producers. It's going to be the BP, you know, all the ones that are going to be able to weather the storm and survive. And I'm sorry to keep rambling on, but the last thing that I can impart as far as my experience in New Mexico with oil and gas, um, in the best of times, southeast New Mexico, there are about 4 or 5 small cities, none of them over 60, 70,000 people, um, that thrive as a result of the oil and gas industry. When things are going well, if you go to a place called Hobbs, New Mexico, or Carlsbad, New Mexico, where Carlsbad Caverns is, or any of the small towns around there, to stay at a rinky-dink hotel like La Quinta or something is $450 a night. And these people that work in the oil fields, they'll rent those places for months at a time at that price because they're making so much damn money they don't give a shit, and because these towns don't have the housing or infrastructure for uh, the surplus of people that arrive in the good times. And
man, I would be out there in an Airstream, 100% chance.
you do have that, although I mean these are places that are you know, have people that are very, you know, most oil fields are also places where people are very protective about their property. So you know, you can't just set up shop anywhere, first of all. And you know, you have a lot of these people that as this is their um you know, they're just the workers in the field, you know, that they it just, that what you're saying almost makes too much sense. That would make sense, but you don't see it enough, right? And don't ask me why. So um I guess what I was trying to get at though was that because of the cyclical nature of the oil industry, most of these towns will not uh, they don't want to take the risk of building as much housing as they would need for these workers, because once the bust occurs,
Right.
they take off, and now you have a bunch of vacant housing, and your housing market is shot to shit, and so it's a real weird thing, man. So anyway,
Yeah, and then it was just saying, like, they were interviewing this guy who was like 25 years old, and he said he remembered back when the last time it went bust, he was like struggling to make his $1,000 truck payment. And I was like, you had a truck payment that was $1,000? I was like scrolling back up to see if I missed the point where he said that he was a trucker, but he wasn't. He just worked in the oil fields. He just had a crazy truck.
well, some of it's, again, it's like these people that are working in the fields, they they're not wise with their money. You know, they spend the money as fast as they make it, you know. And I shouldn't say everyone, but you know, a lot of them, they don't, they haven't received to do a lot of this work. It's challenging work, and it pays really well, but it doesn't require a lot of education. um you know, one of the other things is we I used to work for community colleges, and one of the presidents of a community college I worked for, he used to tell me stories. He worked at the he was the president of the community college in Hobbs, New Mexico, which is like the hotbed for oil. And one of the programs that they offered was for CDL certificates, which they were encouraging students to get this CDL certificate, because if you drive a truck in oil country, you can clear 6 figures no problem, just driving an oil truck. And I mean, think about it. You know, you off of a certificate, here we are. I got three college degrees under my belt, and I haven't got made over six figures in my life. And you could get
same. I'm out here with like a JD, like a license to practice in 3 states, and here we are.
But what's wild is that part of the reason why there's such a demand for people with CDL licenses is that a lot of people with a CDL license can't pass a drug test. So, you make of that what you will. But we like most of our conversations, these become a bit circuitous in terms of the direction and whatnot. But all of these things are interrelated, in terms of where we started with the discussion of the petrodollar, which is such a wild and
the petrodollar for sure. That is a very deep thing that can go into. We could have a whole episode. In fact, I think we should eventually have a whole episode just on the petrodollar and what that exactly means. And
the simple definition of a petrodollar is the revenue from oil in mainly Middle Eastern countries, a revenue that is denominated in US dollars, not the currency of the countries where the oil comes from. All those nations that export their oil must sell it in dollars. So if the dollar loses value, so does their oil. But countries also peg their real currency to the dollar. That means fixing their currency with the dollar. So if the dollar fluctuates, so does their currency. If the dollar value lowers, so do the goods and services of that country.
It's a head scratcher. But
what about this? What about this tiger that got the virus?
Well, if we're really diverging, let's talk about how apparently animals can get the virus.
Right. This is crazy. This whole thing.
But what was hilarious is they're like, we don't think that animals can infect humans.
Right, but wasn't the whole point was that humans got infected by an animal? I didn't understand that point of the whole article.
Well, also when they're like, they were saying like, you can give it to your dog, but dogs can't infect you, or tigers can't infect humans, or whatever.
And they were saying like pets can't infect you, but somehow like you can get like. I thought the whole point was that it jumped from an animal to a human.
I mean, again, it's like trying to figure out the petrodollar. None of this shit makes sense, right? But beyond that, are we going to fucking put any faith in anybody's suggestion of how you can or cannot be infected at this point? Because it seems like everything we've been told was wrong. It's like, it only affects old people. Young people are safe. Kids, they won't get sick, and masks aren't necessary. And at each turn, whatever they told us previously, we find, it turns out that was wrong. And then they come back and they say, it's that we're still learning so much about this virus. You don't know shit. Come on, guys.
I mean, what were you doing in Fort Detrick this whole time, for crying out loud?
But for all you know, it's like when they created crack and released it into the hoods in the United States. They had no idea that eventually, little white kids were going to get sprung off of it. It's like the same thing. It's like you have this perception of how it's all going to work out, and you run your models and all that. And it's like, yeah, gotcha, bitch. Like life takes its own turns. Gotcha, bitch.
Yeah, well, as it turns out, the economy is just struggling. People who had essential jobs are also being laid off due to market forces. People are trying to control the market. People are trying to put tariffs on things, and the prices are going down. Now it's amazing, the price of gas is getting so cheap. I don't drive anywhere. I basically walk everywhere or potentially ride my bike at most. But gas is cheap now.
Think about these
but
people.
They're trying to make it the cost of gas rise. And also, this is the other thing, which Jessica thought was a bit strange. When President Trump was saying, well, gas is so cheap right now, it's like everybody just got a tax cut. I was like, wait, what?
But
what are you talking about? I have no job. The reason why gas is cheap is because no one can go to work. There's no demand because no one needs gas because everyone's at home.
Exactly. It would be a tax cut if we were actually going to the pump every day and filling up. But
right,
you know, my tank's been on full for like 2 weeks for the first time in who knows how long. So it's like,
right,
you know, like,
right. Every time I get in my car to move it out of the driveway to work out in the driveway, I'm like, oh, I'm on F right now.
and that's what the F happens, right?
Yeah, that's what the F happens. The F happens when you don't need to drive anywhere because you're straight up at home. You stayed home. Stay your ass at home.
But that's hilarious because like that shows you just how basic his whole mindset is. Because think about it: if you haven't gone anywhere and you haven't had to fill up once, let's say at the end of this, you know, gas is 30-40 cents cheaper than it was prior to the whole coronavirus scare, and you go fill up your tank, you know, even if it's 40 cents cheaper and you get 15 gallons, your tax cut, do the math, 15 gallons at 40 cents, that's $6 that you save.
Balling, bro, balling.
That you
that
save.
Is like almost like, I was gonna say Chick-fil-A, but you're not really on a Chick-fil-A level with $6.
You know, there used to be in the glory days here in New York, I used to be able to get bomb sandwiches for $6-7. Used to be able to get like 3 tacos for $6, but
I could get a Pollo Tropical Tropi Chop for like less than $6.
Not anymore, bro. Nothing that cheap anymore.
Wendy's, you get off the Wendy's like the value meal, maybe. I don't know, but $6. Come on, man. Come on, man.
I mean, he's just so out of touch with the people, which I think is a conversation for another day. But I think there's a real danger in enamoring ourselves with rich and powerful people that we say, hey, they're successful and they managed to do this, that, and the third, so they would make a capable leader of our country.
And this is what you were talking about, people talking about Bill Gates.
Yeah. So
because he actually is a successful businessman now. I mean,
that should be our topic. You know, that's a hot topic for me, and let's touch that one. You know, next time we come around, man, because I think there's a lot we could talk about there. Whether it's Gates, it's Bloomberg, any of these characters, man. Hell, even Biden. You know, people are so out of touch with
Bezos.
Bozo.
Bozos.
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground today, my man.
I think we did over here on That's What the F Happens, episode number 4. We were just talking about essentially gas, how, you know, not only people can get gassed up, countries can get gassed up, cartels can get gassed up, but as it turns out, none of us are really filling up on gas because we don't need them because we're at home. We're stuck at home, which is also a tax. Gassed up rhymes with tax cut. So
thanks on F.
Yep. All right. Well, hey, thank you everybody for tuning in to this 4th episode on That's What the F Happens. We will be back with more talks with my man Clay. I'm Ali.
Always a pleasure talking with my brother. It's good. Hopefully we've you know, shed some light on some topics for those interested, man. It's fun chopping up. We love y'all. Take care. That's
love
what
y'all.
happens.
Uno.